We have some prepared questions that we're going to facilitate the event through, but we will have some time toward the end for a question and answer portion. So feel free to the attendees to put your questions into the chat. So if I may, I'd like to start out by having each of the panelists briefly introduce themselves. And let's start with Brenda.
Great, thanks so much, Kris. So hello, everyone. I'm Brenda Calixte. I'm the Attorney Recruiting Manager at Morgan Lewis here in Boston. I've been in recruiting for, gosh, 15 plus years. I won't give the exact number, but at the firm, I handle all of the entry-level recruiting as well as lateral recruiting. And I'm happy to be on this panel today.
Thanks, Brenda. Kris?
Thanks. Kris Morrison. I'm a proud double Eagle, triple Eagle if you count my education masters, but triple Eagles kind of prefer to be just BC High. So I'm maybe I'm a 2.5 Eagle. I am the hiring partner in the Boston office of Jones Day, where I was a founding partner 9 years, 11 months, and 16 days ago. It was January 1. It's an easy hiring partner's parlor trick. And I am former and maybe current head of the Boston chapter of the Alumni Association. I don't think we've replaced me in quite some time, although we haven't been as active lately as you might imagine. So happy to be here.
And of course, Jen.
Yes, you all know me, of course, but yeah, I'm Jen Perrigo, Assistant Dean of Career Services, and I commend you all for putting this together. I have been doing legal recruiting or law school career advising for about 15 years as well at a number of different schools. So I can tell you, or I can attest to the deep experience and great perspective on this panel of our panelists, both Kris and Brenda. I've worked with them in their capacities for many years. So I think I'm pretty confident to say you could ask them anything and you're going to get a, terrific, insightful answer.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, we're very lucky to have you all here. So jumping right into it, of course, with current events, what impact has the pandemic had on demand for work in various practice areas of the firm? Kris, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Sure, I would say, our demand hasn't changed drastically. Certain departments are busier now than they were, but businesses have really found a way to keep going. So our transactional practices are still going really strong. Our IP practice is having its best year ever. I'll say, frankly, the trial practices, the discovery is still going on, but without getting cases moved towards trial, that's really slowed down a bit. There aren't any jury trials. Most cases are not bench trials, and even bench trials, I think a lot of litigants would be reluctant to do remotely. So that's the only thing that has seemed to slow down for us. As I look around the market, I see there aren't a lot of pockets of empty activity or lawyers sitting around. All of our associates are sort of hitting on all cylinders, and that's what I hear from other firms as well. There was a brief period in March when people kind of didn't know what to do when we went home and things like that, but it ticked back up again pretty quickly.
Great, thank you so much. Brenda, if you could answer that.
Yeah, I think very similar to what Kris mentioned. A lot of our clients were coming to us with various requests that were a little bit different than the typical work that we were seeing. Our practices in labor and employment, litigation, bankruptcy definitely saw more activity post-March. But a lot of our clients were coming to us with questions and matters that revolved around the pandemic. So this actually allowed our attorneys to look at how we could better serve our clients. And we actually formed a client task force on COVID-19 that helped guide our clients on a multitude of issues surrounding, employment law issues, visa, immigration status requirements, and ongoing federal and state updates that we needed to, stay current on. So where the traditional work slowed down a little bit, we were being thoughtful and creative, and just trying to provide our clients with as much client service work as possible by just keeping them current on what was happening in the world.
Yeah, that's helpful, and hopefully it's a good sign, right? So for the next question, as a firm, how and when do you determine your entry-level hiring needs? And what factors go into making those decisions? Brenda, if you wouldn't mind, we'll go back to you.
Sure. I think probably each firm does things a little bit differently based on their hiring needs. But it's really a practice group driven request. So typically, if you're thinking about it, we're hiring 2 years out for our junior associates. So it's kind of hard to gauge, how many first year associates we're going to need, to start in our first year class 2 years out. But hopefully everyone has their models in check, and based on previous years, we've determined that a variety of factors go into determining our needs for each of our incoming classes. That ranges from having conversations with all of our practice group leaders across all offices, based on attrition, client billables, associate hours. If we're bringing on new partners, do they need support in the various ranks? And just, new matters that are coming into the firm constantly.
And so it sounds like it's ever evolving, kind of as a present needs. Thank you so much, Kris. You can answer that.
Kris, your mic isn't, and I can tell what you're trying to say. Your mic isn't great, but I'll take it over. It's for us, it's a very different process. And I want to make this a commercial for Jones Day, but we don't look at practice groups. When we hire, we don't hire young people into practice groups. We hire them into the firm as summer associates, and the vast majority of our hiring comes through the summer associate program. But even in the summer program, you're completely unassigned. At the end of the summer program, when you get an offer, it's completely unassigned, and it's not till a year after practice when you make your own selection about which practice group you're gonna join. And we're very clear with young people that this isn't like a game of musical chairs. We're a firm of 2,500 lawyers. If a couple more want to do litigation or a couple more want to do banking and finance than anticipated, we'll absorb that. So we're currently, we budget starting around June. We start to look at the budget for the following year's summer associate class. And then really a lot of it turns on the return rate from the end of the summer. The power, you all, as you're looking for jobs, have a certain power dynamic right now. You're kind of in the driver's seat. At the end of your 2L summer, that power dynamic has shifted a little bit. It becomes a little bit harder for you to say, I'm going to go do something else. So we do very well, as I think most large firms do, at the end of that summer. But if we have folks who are going off to clerkships, which we often do, going off to do other kind of internships, things like that, they're going to delay their start. We factor that in. And really we look at each at an office level, how the office wants to grow, and where it wants to grow. But we don't, as most firms do, look at practice groups in the same way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's helpful as a kind of way to evaluate your needs and how you approach the the market or that class of students. So as a follow-up and a good transition, with this present year, do you anticipate your class to be bigger, smaller, around the same? And if you could kind of speak about what you anticipate from similarly situated firms. And Kris, I'll go right back to you.
All right, great. Our firm, our program will be substantially the same. In Boston, my target last year was 4. I ended up with 8. Again, because it's such a large firm, it doesn't really trouble us. My target for this summer is 6. And so I expect we'll have about the same number of summer associates across the firm. we average around 200 or 220 summer associates. I don't think that's going to change. We had, based on what we, the beginning of the summer back in April, we made the decision to go fully remote and have a fully remote summer program. We had a full 10-week program, and we learned a lot from that. One of the things we learned was that we can do it. So we started, when it came time to start our new lawyers, we started them all fully remote again, and on time. We didn't, I know some firms are sort of crossing their fingers and hoping things get better in January or February, so they pushed off start dates. Our start date was 2 weeks later than typically, because as you probably know, a lot of folks were taking the bar in October who ordinarily would have been taking it in July. But I think that story will vary. The larger firms, I think, are all in a similar boat. And really, when you think about OCI, it's mostly the mid-size and larger firms that are going to be doing their hiring through OCI. And I think they're all in a very similar boat. There will be some firms, and there's some have already announced you can find, I don't want to out any firm, but you can find them on Google, as we were talking about earlier, or I'm sure Jen probably knows, who've already announced they're not going to have a summer program next year. And that's, a personal decision at each firm. I think it relates to how this past summer went, what their debt looks like, what their, metrics look like on a going forward basis. And for some firms, that's a very prudent decision. We couldn't imagine a summer at Jones Day without a summer program. And, there was some talk very early in April about, well, let's just cancel it like everybody else is doing. And that was very quickly squelched. So I think you'll find a lot of firms are going to have similar or maybe slightly smaller programs. You won't find a lot of firms at the OCI level, so again, the mid-size and larger firms, who are going to be growing their classes. I think you will find some firms on the smaller side who are trying to take advantage of the opportunity to hire some students they might not otherwise get to hire, who may be growing their summer classes. But I think while everybody probably expects summer classes are going to be a lot smaller, that hasn't been what I've heard in the market, and certainly not my experience at our own firm.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it's encouraging, and hopefully it'll instill some confidence, into the 2L class and the 3Ls even. Brenda, if you could contribute to that.
Yeah, I think what Kris mentioned was spot on. I talk with a lot of my fellow counterparts in the various firms in Boston, and they're thinking the same thing, having either the same number or slightly less. But for Morgan Lewis, we've been pretty consistent over the past few years. We've ranged from anywhere from 7 to 10 2Ls, and then we also do have a 1L program. So I think we're looking at that sweet spot of 7, 8, 9 for next summer. That said, I think with this past summer we actually had 100% acceptance rate. So going into this upcoming OCI season, we're very optimistic about securing that class through OCI. But as Kris mentioned, I think a lot of the firms are being a little cautious, and I'm sure we're going to get to this later, but hiring the folks that they typically haven't been able to hire in previous years. So going out with early offers or callbacks is something that we're seeing a lot in the Boston market right now, as well as in other markets.
Kris, if I can add something here.
Yeah, of course. I was about to ask. Yeah.
Well, I would, certainly agree that with all that has been said, about the, and I'm very optimistic, about this year. We have the same number of employers registering for OCI as we did last year, and we're seeing a lot of interest on the part of firms to recruit our students. I'm always glass half full, but I'm also like, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, right? And the worst is not that bad, I don't think, knock on wood, but I think, I'm listening when I talk to firms about, I don't know if I've talked to one firm that said they were going to grow their program. And so in my mind, I'm listening for the, aversion to risk that we all have when uncertainty is at play, and maybe some firms are being too cautious maybe, but I have my eye on we might reduce by 1 or 2, or we might reduce. So when I look at all those 1s and 2s, I'm still very hopeful. I'm excited, but I think again, it just adds for a competitive season. The great thing about BC is that we have really strong relationships with a lot of employers. Certainly there are firms where, including Morgan Lewis and Jones State, where we have a number of students each year. Hopefully we will continue that, still going. So, I think that's part of the key to, our student success too, is that, we recruit with a wide range of employers. Our alums are always engaged with us from, firms of all different sizes. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm very optimistic, but I am also very cautious.
Cautious optimism is a good
Yes,
step.
exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's a great transition to the next part of our questioning. So with that, I will turn the mic over to our Tori Whalen.
Thank you guys again for being here today. I know we all appreciate it. And given how we were just talking about how firms may be a little bit more cautious in their hiring, I know some students are anticipating a bit of a more competitive market this year. What advice would you have to students to put themselves in the best position to get offers and kind of set themselves apart? Brenda, if you want to lead.
Sure, thanks, Tori. I've been talking to a lot of BC students lately, so I think Jen, you must be telling them something right. But to get out there and start networking, right? So talk to a lot of different firms, reach out to alum. There are definitely folks that can help you get in the door, basically. And you'll get a feel for what every firm, their culture is like, the work that gets assigned to associates, and just a feel for each of the individual firms. I'm more than happy to talk to any student who's interested in learning a little bit about Morgan Lewis, and then from there directing you to various hiring committee members or attorneys in specific practice groups or practice areas, or someone that has experience in a type of law that you have an interest in. Always reach out to career services. They're your first stop, supposedly, that they can help create an outreach plan for you, I'm sure.
Thank you. That's great advice. Kris, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, it's important to reach out to as many firms as you can. I wouldn't be, maybe I don't want to cut off on a question I know you have later, but I wouldn't be so worried about getting early interviews or things like that. It's making a lot of connections so that when, Brenda and I are ready to sit down and be in the OCI process, we know, who are the people we're going to be looking for. Because we used to get a stack of resumes. Now we'll probably get a big PDF file of resumes. And we recognize names. We know people who've been through, and even if they don't meet with me, if they meet with one of my partners or one of my associates, and I get an email saying, geez, I met with this person from BC, they were really impressive. I remember that, and it can be a distinguishing factor if your grades aren't exactly what you hope they'd be, or if there's something else on your resume that you're not thrilled about, if your summer experience this past summer didn't end up happening, things like that. I would also just, this is probably an aside, but if that happens, if your summer program this summer got canceled, as I know happened for a lot of folks, especially one else, just be prepared to talk about something you did instead. Hopefully you've in-stream, all 50 seasons of SpongeBob SquarePants, or rewatch all the Harry Potter, or I don't know I can't remember the name of the vampire movies my daughters watch, but give us something that makes us know that you made the most of your summer. Even I guess nobody really did travel now that I think about it, but if you trained to run a marathon, whatever it is, something that's not just kind of I took my ball and went home.
Thank you, Kris. I think a lot of people can definitely resonate with that advice. Jen, do you have anything to add to that, just from working with students and assisting them with networking?
Yeah, I mean, I think I certainly agree with everything that's been said. I would probably emphasize that one should be flexible. I think sometimes students say, well, geez, we have a lot of firms coming to OCI in Boston. I want to be in Boston. I'm focusing on Boston just because, Brenda and Kris both sit here. But I think if then you say you want to be in Boston and you want to do litigation only, right? And then, so all these firms, let's say there were 45 firms or something, some firms in Boston only have a transactional practice or some are only focused on IP. And so I think sometimes when students are going into this, they have particular firm names that are familiar to them and, they're not as familiar to others. So, when I think both Brenda and Kris said, talk to as many people as you can, think of, firms, practice areas and so forth outside the usual suspects and even outside of Boston, and I say even outside of Boston, I mean, there's lots of people who came to BC, we're a national school, who always want to be outside of Boston, which is great. But again, no matter where you are, I think you have to figure out what your priorities are. And so, think about another market. You can have your first choice and your second choice, think about other practice areas. So I would say be flexible. And when you're networking, it's kind of comfortable to approach people and talk about things that, with which you are familiar. But I think, there's a lot that one doesn't know as a 2L about this process, about the practice of law at a big law firm. And so, stretch a little bit in terms of what you thought your goal was and also the people to whom you reach out to.
Thank you so much. So going off that, assuming this is a more competitive year regarding the hiring process, what advice would you have to some students who maybe didn't secure the summer associate position that they had hoped to? And what opportunities should they look for instead during their 2L summer to be able to put themselves in a good position for their 3L year and to find a job in the market that year instead? Kris, if you would want to take this one first.
Yeah, I'd love to actually. Let me tell you just a little bit about my story to back it up. I came to law school as a joint degree student. I'd been a special ed teacher in Maine and here in Newton. And I, fully expected I was going to go into special education law or something like that. I ended up loving law school, which was a great surprise to me. Because I loved it, I did well, or I did well because I loved it. I'm not sure which came first, but so I got tracked, and I ended up going to a firm most of you have never heard of, but at the time it was quite literally one of the one or two most competitive firms to get a job in Boston, a place called Hill and Barlow. Governor Patrick was a partner there. Governor Weld was a partner there. Many of the judges, I guess many of the judges in DMAS had been. Most of them have moved on now. And it was impossible to get a job there. And I was, I had friends on law review with me who we all were trying, and I was thrilled to get the offer. And I clerked for a year, went back to the firm, and I was there. I started in August or September. December 7th, we got an email announcing the firm was closing. And it came out of nowhere. The firm, I'm sure you all are now familiar with the firm DLA. DLA, it used to be DLA Piper Rudnick Gray Carey USA LLP, which I used to nudge my friends about. And I had a lot of friends there because that's where the Hill and Barlow real estate group went, and the rest of the firm kind of went its separate ways. And so from that experience, I was sort of left, 4 months into my practice, with a daughter who was, I guess, 13, 14 months and another daughter on the way, looking for any port in a storm. And so I looked at absolutely any law firm you can imagine. Ended up at a firm that then was called Hannafy & King. It's now called Murphy & King, and it was about 25 or 30 lawyers. And I practiced there for 10 years and, had a great career there, made partner. And then when Jones Day opened in Boston, they invited me and several others to become the sort of founding partners of the Boston office. And I tell that story as quickly as I can because I think it's important for you all to remember that this isn't the end of the road for you. I mean, 2L summer is obviously important, and we'd love nothing more than for you to get the job you want and stay there for the rest of your career. But the truth is that's not what most people do anymore. And so when you talk about, put yourself in the best position, I think Brenda will probably say the same thing I do. Most big firms are not hiring 3Ls. Unless you're coming from a clerkship, this is kind of your opportunity for now to get in as a summer associate at a big firm. that doesn't mean that 3, 4, 5 years down the road, you won't have another opportunity. You never know where those opportunities may arise. So when you ask, what can you do to be in the best position? I think you can just find a job that you're going to be able to love for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I know a lot of you sort of have this, or maybe not, but there's a lure that many of you have this sort of 3-year plan. I'm going to pay off my debts and then go do what I really want to do. And most of you stay with us anyway because expenses rise to meet income. But I think it's important, if you don't get, your first or second or fifth or seventh choice at a big firm, keep in mind there are some incredibly successful lawyers at mid-sized firms and at small firms that are all, in Boston in particular, are run by BC alumni who would love to have you and to train you and make you an apprentice. So to me, that's the best advice I can give about that, is to not assume that you have to get a big law job or it's over for you, because that's certainly not the case. I thought I thought my world was crumbling down. I was at this great big firm, and I ended up at a 25, 30 person firm and did great. And then, was able to have another opportunity, which I never expected. And frankly, when it came along, I didn't really want to do it. Who wants to go from a 30 person firm to we were then bigger than Morgan Lewis before they swallowed up Bingham, but probably one of the third or fourth biggest firms in the world at the time. And it was a tough transition, but I was really lucky to be able to do it. And now I'm probably rambling, but I just want to, I can't say strenuously enough that you shouldn't feel like this is your only shot at any kind of job ever. I'll stop now.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate how candid that was. Brenda, would you have any additional advice?
Yeah, no, I think Kris is right. If you don't land that 2L summer associate position, it's not the end of the world. There are some firms that are hiring 3Ls, not all, as Kris mentioned, but there are a few different opportunities out there for 3Ls. If for one reason or another that associate who spent their 2L summer at a firm is no longer going to start as a first year, all of a sudden there's an opening. So there are a few rare 3L openings, and career services definitely are aware of all of those positions that become available. I would also say, just to refresh your network, you've made a lot of contacts going through the OCI process. You have hiring partner names, you have attorney recruiting manager names readily available. I would just stay in touch. I think obviously if you want to, steer towards more the transactional practices, find a company that, has a position in-house. I know, just speaking on the lateral hiring side, we do see a lot of our laterals coming from in-house positions that have a certain skill that our attorneys are looking for in specific practice groups. The big Fortune 500 companies, for instance, or a government position if you're interested more so on the lateral, the litigation front. But you just never know what's going to happen 2-3 years down the line. Life happens and interests change. So, just because you didn't land that 2L position, there are plenty of other opportunities out there. Boston is a pretty small place. There are BC Law alum everywhere. Just reach out.
Thank you very much. Jen, would you have anything to add from CSO's perspective?
Absolutely. And I think this is all really good advice. I think oftentimes when students come to me when they don't get their summer associate job that they want, or they may have thought they want, they are looking for a plan, and also where we sit, just as Brenda said, the 3L leads come in. So, I've been thrilled actually this semester. We've had at least 3 big firm jobs for 3Ls, looking for 3L candidates. So I guess where I would focus my comments is, so from that pool, right? I mean, who tends to do well? And so how do you craft your experience between, 2L year and 3L year to reach the top of the pile? I guess I would say just in general, you want to kind of be a different candidate than you were, your 2L summer, right? So whatever that means, does that mean more, as Brenda said, business experience? Does that mean, experience at a regulator whose practice intersects with big law practice? Is that, again, in-house, some other sort of business experience, like at a financial services company? Easier said than done, but higher grades, are you, when you look at your resume, your 2L year, versus your 3L year, what can you do between, not only your 2L summer, but, your 2L spring, what classes are you choosing, your 3L fall, what, externships can you leave room for, what clinics are you doing to make it look like you are now I don't want to oversimplify, but basically say that you're a business lawyer, or you are a different, you are a different candidate, or these are all the things that you're bringing to the table. So again, I would reinforce, I think a lot of people say, oh, 2L summer, that's the end of it. But there are so many different ways to chart a legal career, and we can help you be strategic, again, depending on your interests. If those are your interests, great. But I would also remind people, not to try to push a square peg into a round hole. If you came to law school to do special education law, and that's what you've always wanted to do, and you just kind of feel like you're not being yourself when you're interviewing during OCI, listen to that, listen to yourself, because you'll still have a wonderfully successful legal career. So I have a lot to say on this topic, but I'll edit myself because you can talk to me anytime.
Thank you. It's much appreciated. And thank you again for being here tonight. I'll now turn over to Kate, who has been receiving some student questions.
Sure. So I'll just start off by saying, students watching, feel free to add any other lingering questions that you may have into the chat. I will continue to monitor those, but I'm going to start with something I think's been on all of our minds, particularly this year. And Brenda, I'll start with you. Has your firm participated in any pre-recruiting, and how have you heard about that working in the market, especially in the Boston market this year?
Yeah, great question. I feel like pre-recruiting has been happening the past few years, so it's nothing new. Don't worry, guys. It's firms, trying to get ahead of the game per se. So it's those long-lasting relationships, the connections that we've made from 1L, even 0L year. It's definitely prevalent in the Boston market. I wouldn't say that firms are looking to hire their entire 50-person class pre-recruiting. I think they're looking to, just try to get out there, put their best foot forward, and just, secure one or two positions. That may be different at every firm. I don't want to speak for every firm. Morgan Lewis, we are being very selective in who we recruit. So, that said, we're doing some early callbacks, but traditionally we're waiting until OCI before we're making offers to the majority of our pool of candidates. And actually, I was on a webinar today with my NELP cohorts, and so these are law school and law firm professionals from across the country, and this question actually came up, and firms are definitely pre-recruiting. They're just trying to stay competitive pre-OCI. So nothing new. Don't feel bad if you're not pre-recruited. You will be recruited eventually.
Good. I'm glad to hear that there are definitely additional opportunities. And Kris, have you had a similar experience with pre-recruiting?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I attended NELP, and I'm pretty sure I coined the term pre-recruiting about 7-8 years ago. So I should be getting some royalties on that. But to me, it had always been, students from a far-flung school, somebody from Cornell who's, from the Boston area and is in the Boston area for the summer, their 1L summer. They reach out, and I can make them an offer before they go back, and then I have to schlep up to Cornell or New York to interview them. I've done that, with Georgetown, with Cornell, with, non-Boston schools. I generally have not done a lot of pre-recruiting in Boston, with the exception of two exceptions. One, IP candidates, and if there are any who are out there now, or who watch this later, be in touch with us. And candidates of color. I mean, it's a very competitive market for candidates of color and other less represented populations in the market. And so there is a lot more that goes on in there. I started out the season sort of aggressively, into the idea of recruiting. I have hired one student from UVA who reached out to me back in April and, kept coming back. She was determined. She really wanted to work at Jones Day. And finally, she's a great candidate, but she kind of wore me down. I finally gave in. I was like, if somebody wants to work here this bad, she's hired. And I had a bunch of other students in for a second round. And I sort of started to feel like, okay, these are students who reached out to me from one way or another. They have a connection. Some of them are great. Some of them, I can't tell because I don't have a pool of candidates that I'm comparing them against as I typically would in OCI. And I finally just said, look, unless there's some exception, I'm just putting a hold on it until we get into OCI. And that's, not all Jones Day officers are doing that. Some are still engaged in a lot more pre-recruiting if they've got, different competitive factors. But I just felt like, most students only have one semester of grades. Grades are not everything, but grades are important. I can tell if you've got a 3.9 your first semester, I don't worry about your second semester grades because I know what they're going to be. But if you have a 3.5 and I think maybe you're somebody who I think can really improve that, I want to give you that opportunity and not, bring you through the whole process now and then have somebody say, I don't know where this person is because I can't judge them against others. So we have slowed it down. One thing I'm sure of is that if you have classmates who've been recruited and have taken offers somewhere, that can cause a pit in your stomach, and it can make you kind of worry about where am I in this process. And I can just assure you that it sounds like a lot of people who are getting offers. It's not a lot of people who are getting offers, and those people might be the ones who, there are always several of you, and not just at BC, but I care most about BC, who accumulate offers, and you can't make a decision. You get this paralysis and you have 5 or 6 or 8 offers. That's not helpful to you because you can't choose among 5 or 6 or 8 law firms. You can choose among 2 or 3. And it's sure as heck not helpful to your classmates who are trying to get offers. If I've got a class, Jones Day is a massive law firm, but I'm only hiring 8 in Boston. I can help you in New York or DC or Chicago if you're interested in those places. But I can only put so many offers in the field. And if somebody is holding 5 or 6 or 7 offers, and I can always tell who those people are after a week or so, and I know where they're going to go, whether they're going to come to Jones Day eventually or where they're going to go elsewhere. I've been doing this a long time, but it's, some of those people I think are coming off the market now, and that's probably to your benefit. And just to, to add to that, don't be that person. It's going to be a competitive time. So if you've got an offer at a firm where you think you can be happy, don't wait for 4 or 5 more to roll in. Take that offer, make it easier on the firm. Tell the firm, yeah, I am 100% committed to you. I needed a day to think about it or over the weekend, but I don't need the extra time. And Brenda, I'm sure will too. We'll always give you the extra time if you want it. But when you're asking for 2 or 3 or more extensions, we know what's going on there, and it's not hard to figure out. So I think, there was a firm, I'll stop after this, but when I was a law student, there was a firm that would always make offers to law review students at their first interview. And that caused a big stir, and some people just accepted it. I'm done with this process. It's sort of not a tier 1 firm, but they were getting people by doing that. And some pre-recruiting is being done by tier 1 firms, but some's also being done by firms that are kind of playing on your panic. And so just keep that in mind when you hear about what's going on.
I was just gonna say, great, Kris, and Jen, you look like you are ready to jump in. So,
well, no, I love the comments. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, and I love the comment that you get that pit in your stomach, right? I mean, I'm talking to all these 2Ls who have pits in their stomachs, I think, and I can certainly say, look, it's only a select number of students who are getting it, but it still feels like it. Just we're trying to track this information in the CSO. Again, we always try to track it. I mean, this, as Brenda said, this is nothing new. But what I do think is different about it is that students, as has been said, are more likely to accept. And so that's what makes it different this year. Like I said, we were trying to track it. So again, anyone who's watching now or anyone who is listening later, if you had an initial interview or a callback or you have an offer and acceptance, please let the CSO know, email me or law.career. But I just looked before this program in this very moment, and we had 13 students who have accepted offers at what I would call big firms. So 13 out of 250. Not that all 250 I want to go through this process or anything, but I think that's helpful information to know. Not everybody has a job. And what I like about recruiting is kind of just what Kris said. You were talking about people collecting offers. I think it spills into the OCI process itself, because if you are, someone who is naturally going to get a lot of attention, let's say you have high grades, right? You're in the top 10% of the class. And by the way, not everyone by definition, right, can be in the top 10% of the class. That's only, a select number of people that if they accept an early offer, they're off the board, and so I think it gives the opportunity, and oftentimes because they are getting a lot of attention during OCI in those initial interviews, they're nervous because at OCI, they don't have a job. Like, we know they're going to get a job. We know they're going to get a bunch of offers for the most part, but they're still nervous. And you can't tell someone, oh yeah, you can reject. Why don't you let your classmates take those 6 offers? Because we know you're probably going to go, you're going to be fine, but they can't believe it until they get that first offer. So I think, I don't want anyone to have a pit in their stomach, but I kind of like that impact of recruiting, at least this season, that, people, all of you have gotten to know this market, at least, or other markets for about 1.5 years now. So I feel like people are making informed decisions, they're doing their research and so forth. And I hope it'll get folks an at-bat during OCI that might have just been shut out, and so it loosens up those schedules a little bit. I hope I didn't geek out too much in my career services. I want everybody to get a job.
No, Jen, I think that was a great perspective and definitely something I think many of us 2Ls haven't really thought about and are concerned about. So thank you for that point. So I will start with Kris on this question. How can students best prepare for this round of OCI, and what considerations should they keep in mind, particularly with this year being definitely different than years past?
I'll say a couple things that may be a little contradictory. One is be willing to be really honest about why you're looking at an office. If you tell me you want to go to our Pittsburgh office, I will refer you to our Pittsburgh hiring partner, and they will, if I think you should get a callback, you'll get one. But if you've never been to Pittsburgh, don't tell me that. I had a student, well, I don't have to worry about it here. I had a student from BU who told me they were a lifelong Washington Nationals fan and wanted to go to our DC office. You all may not know this, but the Nationals have only been in existence about 8 or 9 years. Right? This person was in their 20s. Unless they were a Montreal Expos fan, that was just not true. And so I think it's really important to, be thoughtful about where you're applying, and be willing, if there's a city you're committed to, be willing to kind of cast a really wide net so that, you may be at a 100-person firm instead of a 2,000-person firm, and still be okay with that. Kind of on the other side, though, is I do respect people who are really, doggedly interested in a particular law firm. Now, you can't be doggedly interested in every law firm. There's I've hired a candidate recently who just didn't really meet our grade cutoff. She'd had some, personal issues that affected her grades, and she doggedly pursued Jones Day. And eventually I said, if somebody, again, and it's just like this young woman this summer, she so wanted to work here that I hired her out of the sheer force of her will, and I couldn't be happier about it, because she's been, a great addition to the firm, and she will remain a great addition to the firm, because she decided from the very beginning, and I don't think it was me, but from the very first day we met, I realized that she really wanted to work with us. And so she's fully committed, and I think she'll very likely stay on and become a partner at Jones Day, because she just, she fully was involved. So if there's a firm that you identified that you really, really, really want to work at, and you don't quite meet their qualifications, or even if you do, but you don't make the cut, this is the time. When I come on campus, I typically open up I don't take lunch and I don't take breaks because I want to add a lot more students to my schedule. This is the time I don't have to worry about that. If you don't make my schedule and you really, really, really want to work at Jones Day or really, really want to work at Morgan Lewis or Wilmer Hale or wherever it is, just follow up, because I'm sitting here in my den. And if, I can see a great candidate and it costs me 20 minutes of my life, I'm going to take that 20 minutes. I'm a hiring partner. That's what I do. Not every law firm partner will do that, but that's my job, is to find the best candidates. And so, again, don't pick every law firm, because that we'll be able to see through that. But do pick, one or two that you really want to be at. And there's absolutely no harm in being really aggressive about how much you want to work there. Do your research. Make sure you really do. It's sort of like, I think of it as sort of like early decision applications to college, right? You remember that? That wasn't so long ago for many of you. If you apply ED to a school you're not quite sure about, like Brown isn't going to let you off the hook, right? And so you just think about that. If you apply really aggressively to me and I make you an offer and then you make me wait, my feelings are going to be hurt about that. I'll be honest with you.
Great. And Brenda, what are your thoughts? How can students best prepare?
I would say, be prepared, number one, obviously. So have your materials ready to just, shoot over to Kris, shoot over to myself, and make sure there's no typos, right? Make sure you're addressing your cover letter to the appropriate firm. Otherwise, it'll immediately get tossed. I see that way too often. Because that is just an indication of your writing and your attention to detail, and that's qualities that every lawyer needs to have. So be prepared is number one. I would say be transparent. I think these days, even firms, I think we're being more upfront with Kris and myself saying, we're looking for X amount of summers for this spot. We're doing early interviews. Jen mentioning that there's 13 students already with offers. I think transparency is huge. This is like dating. You can date as many people as you'd like, but be transparent. And the firms are equally going to be as transparent this year, more so than in the past, I have a feeling. And then, for those firms that you have an interest in, reach out to the 3Ls at BC. Get their experience. Ask how their summer associate program was, who they should reach out to after, and just their experience going through OCI. I think that's that'll lead you well into January.
Great, thank you. And Jen, is there anything you'd like to add about this? Any ways to prepare for this new odd OCI season?
Right. I have lots to say on this topic, as you can imagine, but you're going to hear lots from me, so I will limit my comments. But I would say two things, maybe three. One is that, we are so lucky at BC, like I said, that we have so many firms that want to recruit with us, and that is fantastic. And I would also say, and again, I'm kind of representing the national market here in some ways, let's say you're interested in Chicago. For whatever reason, we do through the law consortium have a Chicago job fair, and that will happen again, but it's small. It doesn't, you can almost, knock on wood, count on most of the firms in Boston who have summer associate programs, either recruit with us or want to see you or so forth. There's so many law firms in Chicago that want to see BC law students and would be happy to get an application from a BC law student, but we don't necessarily have, 100 BC law students who want to go to the Chicago market, so they're not going to sign up for a schedule at OCI. So what I would say, that's a roundabout way of saying, reach out either earlier for networking or right when you get your grades to apply to those Chicago offices that don't recruit with us, because, so I'll talk about that in future CSO programs, but I just want to make sure people know that. Second, I think I just want to emphasize that every conversation during OCI or an informational interview, whatever, is evaluative. I think we all have kind of gotten a little more relaxed in this Zoom world, you know, either whether it be what we're wearing or what we're saying or the backgrounds or, you know, the dog barking or whatever it is, you know. And I think a lot of students say, and even a lot of attorneys say, you know, oh, during OCI, they're just chatting, you know, you just want to know whether it's a good fit, and they were really nice, and you know, it's just conversational. They just want to know whether or not you're breathing, you know. And I think nothing can be further from the truth. You know, they can be conversational, but they're also looking for your analytical ability and your judgment, and you know, how seriously are you taking this search? And so I think, you know, OCI this year, even though we've all been living here and I have my, you know, very buttoned up BC law, you know, background, now's the time to button it up a little bit, or at least during those 20-minute interviews during OCI, you know, from what you say to, you know, the environment that you're in and so forth. So that's my tip. And, you know, I love the suggestion to talk to the 3Ls at BC. You know, another LSA committee is actually going to be putting on a program, 3Ls talking to 2Ls, and, you know, looking forward to that.
Great.
I would say if there's any ambiguity, I won't be wearing a suit, but I will expect you to be, for example, to follow up on one of the things Jen was saying. I won't have a background, but I won't be upset if you have a background. I kind of expect if your backgrounds are all lovely, but if you're in some place where it's not professional, then you should have a background ready.
Finally, Tori and I discussed that right before this event, and we checked each other's to ensure that everything was up to par. So just to wrap things up, we would like to ask each of you if you have one final piece of advice that you would give to everyone watching. So I will start, I forgot where we were at, but I'll start with you, Brenda.
Great, thanks, Kate. I think my one piece of advice is just be yourself. Don't stress out too much. You know, going into OCI, it's a very stressful time because, you know, as we've talked about, you may think that this is the end all be all for your career, but, you know, I think just being genuine, being yourself, being prepared, and just knowing exactly, you know, what you want to get out of OCI, and that's a job. So just be yourself, don't stress, and make sure you stay hydrated, get some exercise, clear your mind, you know, all the wellness coming through. You know, I think, you know, just stay focused and don't stress out too much.
Great, definitely something that I think all of us 2Ls can work on, especially right now. Kris?
Yeah, I guess I would say something very similar is just to reiterate, this isn't your only shot. And I always admired when I was a law student, the folks who really wanted to work at a smaller firm or in government, or, you know, one of those employers that doesn't come to the sort of first round of OCI or the first 2 rounds of OCI. And if they could stick with that conviction and, you know, recognize they're going to get a job when everybody around them is accepting jobs and wearing suits, and maybe it won't be so bad because you won't see everybody walking around in suits. But back then, you know, if you wanted to be a public interest lawyer, a government lawyer, you know, you were the only one not wearing a suit in August, and you were pretty lucky about it. But it was hard to kind of stick with that conviction. And so, you know, I guess I would say, as Brenda sort of said, is stick with your convictions. If you want to work at a big firm, those options will be there for you. They may not be there for you right away, but I do believe that as many law firms, there's going to be as many associate positions for BC students as there have always been. Law firms are not eliminating their summer programs, despite what you may have heard. There are a few who are not doing them this year, but they don't fall into the large firm category. They weren't always at OCI anyway. You know, those 13 people who already have jobs very likely were going to be the first 13 people off the board anyway, and they very likely they were going to be where they are. So don't worry about them. They're not your competition, and your competition isn't other BC students. You guys are great. We love to hire BC students. That's, you know, if you go look at the Boston office of Jones Day and count how many BC law alumni there are there. I get made fun of a lot. My first year class this year was only 3 because I had 3 students go off to clerkships. They all went to Jesuit schools. I had BC, Georgetown, and Fordham. I didn't even realize. The other 3 fortunately didn't. Otherwise, I'd be accused of some kind of weird discrimination against non-Jesuit schools. They just happened to go to clerkships. But BC is a great school. It's got a great reputation, not just in Boston, but across the country. And many of you I may have talked to when you were choosing law schools. I used to do a lot of that, trying to convince people to come to BC. I still believe in it. And the reason I told you to come to BC was for this community. And that's still, a reason that you're lucky to have made that decision, because other law schools, even in Boston, who are your competitors, don't have that same kind of community here in Boston, and don't have alumni who are hiring partners to the same extent that are looking out for you all.
Great. And Jen, one final piece of advice?
I would agree with that. Just to kind of remember who you are. This is a competitive process. Even in the best of times, it's a competitive process. And many of you who are so accustomed to doing so well with great reason will feel more concentrated rejection during this process in your life than you have ever felt. I know that is not like a happy statement, but at the same, just remember, like, that is very normal, and it's okay. And it's not, don't take it personally, or who you are, a reflection of how good of a lawyer you're going to be, or whether you're going to get a job, or whether you're going to pay off your student loans. It's all going to be all right. And as Kris said, there's a whole lot of people looking out for you. I mean, I hope that we're all looking out for you in the CSO, and we want every single one of you to get the job that you want. But it's a big community of BC law folks, and this is just one way to get a job.
Great. On that note, it looks like it is exactly 6 o'clock, so it looks like we timed everything quite well. I want to say thank you so much to Brenda, Kris, and Jen for agreeing to be on the panel. And I think you all offered great insight, especially for us 2Ls who are quite nervous at this time. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you to all the attendees for attending the event. And best of luck to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everyone.
you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.